I'm taking care of the pre-sales for the Cohesity for the Middle East and the region here. And our agenda for today session is we'll have a walkthrough the Cohesity solution, the architecture, in terms of architecture, how it is built, what use cases we are addressing and we are focusing on, and how we are doing it, what are the way of delivering the solution exactly, and what are the values out of that. And by the end of the session, we'll leave like 2-3 minutes to have just to have a quick look into the user interface management of the Cohesity solution. We will follow up on this session or this webinar with other webinars, which will be dedicated for specific use cases. So we can arrange for another one for the SQLs, another one for Oracle, another one for SAP HANA, the backup, another one for the scale out NAS, like that. But today is going to be not introduction only, but let's say middle, little bit more than introduction, right? And it's going to be a technical discussion here. And with that, I'm going to forward here, starting. So first, let's see where is the playground for us here as a Cohesity, and what are the challenges that we are addressing and we are resolving. If you look at any enterprise data centers, that you will see multiple components that is being acquired over the time to address the challenge of the secondary storage use cases, right? And I'm talking about use case like backup and file and objects and cloud archiving, for example. Now, all of them, or most of this, is representing some silos within the data center. And the proof for that is you need to have a copy or a full environment or setup for the data protection or the backup, right? But when you have any requirements for analytics or test dev environment, so you are making another copy and you go and buy another storage just for the test dev environment, for example. So whatever data you put on that backup setup is going to be sitting there idle, just waiting for the time to be recovered, right? So there are silos on this part. But if you are dig down more, you will see sub-silos within the data protection itself. Most often time you see that people, they have virtual as well as physical, right? So for the physical environment, most probably they have some applications or database which cannot be backed up by the software which is used for the VMware or the virtualization backup, right? So customer end with having two backup setups, one for the physical and one for the virtual, right? But the story is not ending here, because these backup softwares, they require more compute, right? Like media server and master server, proxy servers, right? So more components need to be added here. And they need as well target storage. You may have one target storage for the backup software, which is handling the virtualization, and another target storage for the backup software, which is handling the physical environment, right? So we are talking about 3 or 4 components here just to address the data protection or the backup only. Now, what is the problem here of having multiple components? The problem is, first of all, the cost, obviously. Second is the complexity for the operation, because they just need in the morning to check the status of the last night backup. They need to log in maybe into 2 solutions or 2 in user interface, right? If they want to plan any upgrade or any change on the setup, they have to look into very complex compatibility matrix, maybe, right, in order to make sure all the relevant components within that setup or within that design is going to work perfectly after this upgrade. So the complexity is not a never-ending story here with the silos. The same thing if you go to the file and object use cases. So people started with having, the NAS storage, or let's say SMB and NFS, or the CIFS protocols. But after some time, they get the requirement because of the data growth, and they have some new applications which are requiring, let's say, object storage, right? And for that, the legacy NAS storage usually is not giving that out of the box, so they have to get some gateways, or let's say object storage gateways, right? So the complexity is going to be increased here as well. Or even worse than that, if the customer is not bringing that NAS storage, dedicated one, so they are utilizing the existing SAN storage, right, for the user file share. And we know the cost of the SAN storage. And this is something that is not built for the actually user file share, right? It is for the transactional data, for databases, for the production application, but not for the user documents and video sharing, collaboration, mainly. And also once the customers start talking about cloud initiatives and they want to have, let's say, cloud archiving. So all these legacy solutions are not architected to work with the cloud because it's been architected way back in time that there was nothing called cloud at all, right? So now they have to figure out a way to send or talk to the cloud, right? So you have to bring something like a translator in between, right? So you have the silos, you have the darkness of the data, the more component and the more copies of the data, the darkness you get more here for the data because you are not able to search, for example, across all the workloads you have from the secondary storage point of view. Right? Now, what we did in Cohesity is we created a platform which can consolidate and collapse all these silos into one place or one platform, let's say, and addressing the use case of the data protection, the file share, the object storage, and the cloud integration as well. And this platform is coming on a software-defined approach in a hyper-converged architecture, right? On a commodity servers, x86 servers, and addressing these use cases, and also managed from one user interface, regardless of how many cluster you have, how many data center you have, doesn't matter, whether it is running on-prem or it is running in the cloud. And on top of that, we built what we call it Cohesity Marketplace. So the idea here is to bring the compute to the data. So instead of having some applications that need to access this copy for analytics or for test or for some scanning, so we can have these apps now running as a Docker container on top of the Cohesity platform directly, right? And I will give examples here. So if you are using Cohesity for the, let's say, scale out NAS, so people need to have reports like auditing, auditing reports, like who accessed which file, which user trying to access which restricted file, and you can track the user activities like that, right? In terms of the security or the authentication and the authorities for the files or the corporate assets, right? So this is something that you can have it from the Cohesity Marketplace. It's a free app. You download it into your Cohesity cluster, whether it is on-prem or in the cloud. Another example here, if you are using Cohesity for data protection or backup. So for that, usually people, they go and do a vulnerability scan on the production servers, right? So the idea here is offloading this task of the vulnerability scan from the production servers to the backup data, right? So your data now, or your backup data, is not sitting idle doing nothing for 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, waiting for a time that you have a recovery requirement. No, it's going to be as an active data, right, on demand. So you get a value out of this backup data or this file share, right? So you are going to consolidate from having external compute running these apps. That is something you can have it within the Cohesity itself, because we have the Kubernetes framework within the platform. Right? So this is like extra values here. But the main thing here is the data management, the ability to ingest the data into the platform, whether it is coming through backup or it is coming through file share or the NAS. Now, this platform is having, in order to design such platform, there are some elements that need to be addressed or you need to make sure that you have it. Right? So the number one characteristics or the element here is the scale out architecture. If you are talking about secondary storage use cases like the backup, like the analytics, like the file share, you need to have scalable solution, because here we are talking about petabytes or hundreds of terabytes, right? If you don't have this scalability, then you are creating silos, another silos, or you are creating multiple islands, within your data center. So the Cohesity platform is a scale-out architecture, means you start today by what you need, and you keep adding nodes, and each node is going to be part of the performance and the overall storage capacity of the cluster or the setup. So you scale out in terms of the performance, in terms of the capacity, but you scale up in terms of the feature and the functionality. Right. Other thing here is the storage efficiency and resiliency. Because of the bulky nature of the data we are targeting here, you need to have very efficient storage. Otherwise, you are going to increase and keep adding more storage, right? And you will have a lot of duplicates here, because these copies, when we talk about backup, usually you can ask any customer, the daily change rate is not going to go beyond 5%, 4%. This is for the large environments, 6%. But most of the customers I see here, especially in this region, is you can think about 1% change or 2% daily change rate, okay? Which is affecting actually how much data you need to ingest on the storage here. And the rest is going to be a duplicate from the previous backup, for example. Right? So you need to have this efficiency. And because of that, we implemented the variable links deduplication here, which can check and access, or let's say assess the data while it is coming to the Cohesity. Okay. And even if the blocks sizing is got changed from user A to user B, still we can detect that this is a duplicate data, and we are going just to update our metadata, but we are not going to write that duplicate block again, right? Other things here, and very important, is the data mobility. So because we are company born in the cloud, so you can have a Cohesity in cloud as a full cluster, or you can have it as just acting or using some storage from the cloud, right? So you can move the data between the on-prem to the cloud, right? So this data mobility, and even moving the data between clouds, not only on-prem to the cloud, but you can move from Azure to AWS, from AWS to Azure, or from AWS to Google, right? As long as you have the Cohesity component there, right? Other things like the mega files and minions management. So you can see all the storage vendors. They are struggling with two things. Number one is the very large files, and number two is the very small files, right? And I'm going to talk in more details in coming slides about the mega files and the minions here. But this is something that we are having very unique way for it, and on the way we are handling the very small files. Just to give you an example here, applications like Eevee or the call recordings, which is generating millions of very small files. If you have the storage with a fixed block size, you are going to waste a lot of space on that storage, right? If it is application that is generating very small files. And I said that it's software defined. And the good thing here is when you have that solution as a block based, or let's say as a hyperconverged, but without the need of having the hypervisor here. So we are running on the bare metal directly. And you have unlimited number of snapshots and clones, whether that's for the backup or for the NAS use case here. And I'm going to talk more also about the instant mass restore and how it is important in case of the restoration or on the speed, the time required to get back to business in case of any disaster. Okay. And such platform always use or always need the non-disruptive upgrade, whether it is on the software or the expansion on the capacity as well. So you should have the ability to add or remove nodes from the cluster without any disruption into the operation, right? Because if we are talking about hundreds of nodes, we have customers with 300 nodes and 400 nodes within the same cluster. And imagine that you have you don't have this feature. If you don't have this feature, then people are going to struggle, right? That's why we made sure that you have one-click upgrade here, and you just upload that file or the new version and go away, leave it, right? And you come after some time and you'll see everything is came to the new release now. Okay. Just a reminder here, if you have any question, please put it on the chat window and I will check it from time to time. So the first element we talked about or we mentioned is the software defined platform. So the platform can be delivered on multiple ways. The first version, or let's say the first approach, is you can have it as a virtual machine or virtual appliance on top of existing hypervisor environment you have. For example, it can be as a virtual machine on top of VMware or Hyper-V or Nutanix Acropolis, right, or KVM. And this is mainly for the robo sites or let's say the virtual data centers. The other way is the robo or the IoT edge or the edge environment. So even though we have the virtual edition, but suppose that the customer doesn't have or don't want to have a virtual environment in their remote office. So in that case, we have very small boxes which can be installed there. And it's a matter of plugging the network and the power, and you are good to go. It doesn't require pre-configuration there. Or I mean, it doesn't require another configuration after you started there. Okay. But the majority of the use cases, this is for the enterprises or the actual, or let's say the scalable solution is when you have it as a hardware or as an appliance. So we work with existing hardware vendors like HPE, like Cisco, Dell, Fujitsu, and this is where you can have the solution coming on their hardware. We have certified bill of materials for that. So for example, with HPE, you can have the end-to-end solution of the Cohesity coming on a DL380 or coming on Apollo servers, the Apollo 4510 or the Apollo 4200 or the Apollo 2200. It can come also from Cisco end-to-end, the software and the hardware running on the hardware of the UCS or the S series, the S32160. Right? Same thing with Dell. The only difference here with Dell and Fujitsu, this is like meet in the channel. So as a partner, you will request the hardware from Dell or Fujitsu and you request the software license from Cohesity. But for HPE and Cisco, you can have the full solution from them because it's an OEM. Apart from that, we have our own hardware, of course, right? So we have different models, the 6000 series, the 4000 series, the 3000 series, right? and different models, different configuration, and different capacity. It's good to mention here also is the licensing. So the license of the Cohesity always is coming from the back-end capacity. So we don't care how many virtual machines you have or the customer have. We don't count how many CPUs you have. It's all about how much capacity you are going to utilize from the Cohesity, whether it is physical appliance or the virtual edition or the cloud edition as well, because we can run in the cloud natively there. So you, for example, you can go to Azure, create 3 virtual machines, and you have the Cohesity software running on them. So you have 3 node cluster there, or whatever number, right? Or you go to AWS and you create that EC2 instance, 3 instance, or 1 instance for POC, and you have the Cohesity cluster there. The same thing with the GCP or the Google Cloud Platform. So this is what I explained just on the previous slide, but it's in more details. And the good thing to note here is we starting to form the cluster by minimum 3 nodes. Okay, and you can scale for unlimited number of nodes. So we go for unlimited or infinite number of nodes within the cluster here. Okay. We introduced recently also the all-flash nodes. So it used to be only the hybrid, which is having like 2 or 3 SSDs, and the rest of the disk are spindle disk or SATA disk. And now we have the all-flash as well. And mainly this is being used for the high-performance NAS use cases. But for the backup, usually people go for the hybrid nodes. And we have larger nodes that is for the archiving, and this is, we're talking about 16 TB disk here based, because we are using the Erasure coding here. So you can have the deep archive on specific nodes if you like. Now let's get deep into the architecture here on the SpanFS. So the SpanFS is the name of the file system. And I said in the beginning, it's a distributed file system. So by the definition, that means that there is no reliance on a specific node on the operations. So each and every node will be having all the components of the software stack here, of the Cohesity file system. So each node will have all this, the data journal, the cluster management, the snap tree, and the distributed key value store, right? And they are acting all together as a one platform. From the management perspective, you can just pin or go to the any IP address of any node within the cluster or the cluster IPs into any browser, and you are good to go to see the full cluster there and manage it. So there are some components here, just to mention a couple of them. The cluster management, this is the one which is responsible for adding and removing any new node, right, into the cluster without any disruption into the operation. And you can see as well, we have the distributed key value store, and this is the responsibility, or it's taking care of the responsibility of the distribution of the data across the nodes within the cluster, or distribution of the task. So if there is one task is coming, whether it is a write request, read request, or searching request, right? So it's going to be distributed across all the nodes, right? So suppose that you have a very large file, let's say 50 GB file, only one 50 GB file. So to ingest that 50 GB file, we are going to split it into chunks, and each node within the cluster is going to participate on that write request. So you have faster ingestion of the data here. On the right side, you can see the QoS, which is responsible for the quality of the service profiles based on the workload criticality or the business requirement here. So you can have some workloads finishing the backup on a faster, or writing first to the SSD and then eventually move it to the spindle disk. Or you can have other profiles for test name environment, or other profile for file share, for example, or as a target storage for other backup softwares, right? So that is the QoS component responsibility here. And then the snap tree, which is the technology and the IP of the Cohesity. And this is the one which is allowing us to make what we call it instant mass restore. This is in case of the backup use case. If you notice, I'm switching sometimes between the backup and the NAS, right? The thing is, because we are a data management platform, you can have this solution for end-to-end backup solution, right? Or you can have it as a backup target storage, or you can have it as a scale-out NAS. So the starting point is the scale-out NAS. If you add the license of the data protect, then it becomes a full backup solution. So during the session and the talk, I'm always shifting and mentioning which feature is for the backup, which component is being used for the NAS mainly, like that. Okay. Now, if you go up on level on the platform or the SpanFS, you see the API layer. And this is where the presentation of the storage is happening to the apps or to the access accounts, let's say, right? And that access or that representation is happening on SMB or NFS or S3 and the Swift protocol as well, right? So whether that app is running on Cohesity as a container, or that app is outside, let's say third-party backup solution, or end user is accessing the file share on Cohesity, or it is the data protect feature of the Cohesity, which is running within the SpanFS actually, right? That's why you don't see the arrow coming from data protect to the API, because it is bundled inside the SpanFS. It's running as a service inside the SpanFS file system. Okay, so this is a quick look into the architecture. If you zoom in into any node within the cluster, you will find these services and this architecture. Now, as a summary for the use cases, you see the first one on top is the backup and recovery, right? So you can get rid of all the legacy backup software and their target storage, their proxy servers, and all of that component. And you have the Cohesity with the scalability here. And this is addressing the majority of the databases, the majority of the applications for the enterprises. From Oracle to SAP HANA to Exchange to Office 365 to SQL to Hadoop, all this is certified to be protected by Cohesity. The other use case, I'm going to the left side, is the smart files. And this is the file share or the scalability or the NAS axis here. So you have the backup, you have the backup target storage, and you have the NAS use case here. From the right side, you can see the disaster recovery, and this can be on another physical data center of the user or another, or maybe on the cloud. And for that, we have the ability to take backup on-prem and then replicate it to another Cohesity cluster in cloud. And we have an application called Runbook app, which is doing the DR orchestration and the automation. And it's a free app included or provided from Cohesity. It's a drag and drop. You can select virtual machines, you select applications from the existing VMware example, right, and put it on that graph within the app, and you can define which application or which virtual machine need to be restored first, how much time you need to wait between the restoration of the virtual machines or the apps. So for example, you restore first the DB, and then you restore the app, and then you restore the web-based server, for example. Okay, so that is for the DR. It can be, as I said, another physical Cohesity storage or another DR instant. I mean cloud instant, Azure, AWS, GCP, or any S3 compatible cloud service provider. The long-term archival use case here is because we have the density, the higher density, in the market for in the terms of the HCI architecture and the direct attached storage. So we have the ability, we have some nodes. We're talking about 700 TB, for example, in one node. And for simple cluster for that node is, we're talking about 1.4 petabytes of usable capacity here, right? And this can be very well used for the long-term archival. And because we are using Erasure coding different levels, so for example, if it is for archiving, you can use Erasure coding 5.1, for example, right? Or the 8.1, which is giving around 83% usable capacity out of the row within the cluster. Other use cases like data center migration or NAS migration or extension for the existing NAS storage, or the security compliance for GDPR or the worm and the data lock capabilities. But I can tell that 80% or 75% of the use cases, the majority are the backup and recovery, the smart file, and the disaster recovery use cases. The others, yes, we are able to do it, and we are able to do it very well also. Very important point I wanted to mention within this webinar, and I wanted to make sure that you got it. It is the security architecture here. By the definition, when we say that the architecture is distributed file system, that means as an operation team, I have less security domains to be worried about. Because if you compare this with the traditional architecture, where you have multiple components, so as a security admins, I need to secure multiple security domains, what we call it security domains here. I need to make sure that my proxy server is secure. I need to make sure my master server is secure. My agents are secure. My media server is secure, right? But here with Cohesity, since we don't have this terminology or we don't need these components, so the focus is going to be, or the security domains is going to be reduced here, right? This is from the architecture or the number of the components, security domains point of view. But if you go to the SpanFS itself, is handling, the way it is handling the data, this is what we call it immutable file system. So immutable backup, that means that if there is any attack or the malware got, let's say, access to the backup admin credential or whatever reason or whatever scenario, so the worst case here scenario is going to happen is that malware is going to request recovery, right, or access to this backup data. But as a Cohesity is immutable, we are going to make a clone and give the access to a copy of the data, regardless who is requesting this data again. Okay, so the worst case is going to happen on a copy of the data. The actual blocks which is being written first time on the Cohesity, that is not going to be touched, regardless who is requesting for that one. Okay, so the backup data is always going to be secured and immutable here. Yes, we do test dev environment out of this, but that is going to be another clone of the backup or the actual blocks. Okay. This is in terms of the data or the protection, or let's say the protection against ransomware. But how about the detection? Let's say that bad things happens, and how I'm going to detect that. So within the software, we have a component, or we have an AI-based algorithm, which is checking all the backup data while it is happening and after it is happening, and checking the trends of the backup. And it can give a report, and it can detect if there is any attack on any production server which has been backed up by Cohesity. It can detect that one, and it can tell that, okay, there is abnormal activity on this specific server, and it's going to give the user the recommendation from which backup he can or she can recover. So it gives recommendation about the cleanest and updated copy or the recent copy of the data, which they can restore from. Okay. That is from the detection point of view. And once that is being detected, also that is going to be isolating that the affected copy of the data, and it's going to inform the end user and giving the recommendation where and how to restore, but also is going to inform the support and automatically if you are allowing that, and they are going to take care of this for you. Last point here is very important in terms of security. We know that all the ransomware attacks or the malwares, they are trying, the number one target for them is the Active Directory, right? Once they get their hand on the AD, then everything within the network or that intranet can be compromised or will be compromised, right? And for that reason, we added the functionality to protect the Active Directory. So you take backup of the AD, let's say every 1 hour or every 2 hours with the Cohesity, and you have the capability to make a comparison later on which objects has been changed exactly. And you can restore that object only, or you can even restore the attributes of the objects within the Active Directory. Okay. Some of the high-level functionality, or let's say more details about the functionality of the platform here. On the solution, whether it is on the platform point of view, the security, data management, or the cloud and multi-tenancy. This is in case of the service provider use cases. I'm not going to go through all of them and just discussing a number of the points here. If I start from the platform, we talk about the cloning with the unlimited number of the clones and the snapshots you can do here. And the variable links deduplication, which is very important here, which is giving very high efficiency or deduplication ratios. The erasure coding, which is responsible for making sure the data has been protected on number of nodes, and you are protected against any failures from the disk perspective or the node perspective, right? If I just move forward in the security, we talked about the Active Directory, and we can integrate with number of Active Directory domains here. So for example, if the customer is having number of AD domains, if there is any trust relationship between them, all what they need is to add only one domain into the Cohesity, and then they can see or they can search and assign any user from all the other domains. If there is no trust relationship between them, we allowing adding multiple Active Directories within the platform as an authentication source. So if you are creating the NAS share from the Cohesity and you can have multiple Active Directories or users coming from different ADs domains here. If I moved forward to the right side, I'm just picking number of features here. The solution is really feature rich, so it's not possible to cover it on one session. So just giving the examples here, right? So the data lock, which is very important for some customers in terms of the compliance requirements, especially on finance, on medical, or the healthcare sectors, where they have data that need to be maintained and they need to comply with the requirement of not deleting or not altering this data for the specific period of time. Can be months, can be years, right? So we have that capability, whether it is for the NAS or the backup data. Okay. File filtering, this is the ability to have specific file format added into the file share, or you are allowing the users to put specific file formats as a whitelist, or you can blacklist it. So you are not allowing them to put, for example, videos or images, right? So it depends on the format you need. That is something you can configure it within Cohesity here. The multi-tenancy, this is applicable to all the backup use case or the NAS use case as well, where you can have that segregation and the self-service portal for the end user or the tenants. And this, whatever I'm talking about here, is going to be applicable whether you have the physical Cohesity cluster or the Cohesity virtual cluster or in the cloud itself, right? The RBAC, or the rule-based access control, this is for the how to give the right access to the right people, And everything within the user interface of Cohesity can be customized in terms of the access. So you can give specific users access as operators, and they see only specific backup or specific components. Or you give, for example, your SQL admins the ability to log in and see the backup of their SQL database. It can be as just a view, or you can make it as a they can even do the backup by themselves. They just define the backup there, and they can do the recovery, right? So you can customize all of this. The RBAC is very rich within the platform here. Moving forward, I'm giving here some screenshots about the functionality we talk about. For example, when you create the cluster, second step is to create what we call it storage domains. So that storage domains is a virtual representation of specific amount of storage within the cluster, right? And for each storage domain, you have the ability whether to turn on or off the inline deduplication or make it post-process, and the same thing for the compression. And you define as well the encryption and the erasure coding or the resilency of that storage domain. So you can make multiple storage domains, each for a specific department. Or if you are enabling the multi-tenancy, you can have one storage domain for each tenant, or you can have one storage domain for all the tenants altogether. So this is a way to organize the things within the story and to have the ability to control this process of the deduplication and the compression. I talked before about the small file optimization. So by default, whenever a block is coming into Cohesity, we check that block size, whether it is more or less than 4K, or it is more than 8 MB, or it is less than 8 MB. So based on the nature of the block, we are going to write it on a specific place without wasting any storage capacity here. This is the key point. When you have an application that is generating tens of millions of small files, 1K, 2Ks, right? All the storage vendors, they are struggling for that and this is affecting the efficiency of the storage as well as the performance, right? While here in Cohesity, you can define and you can change the block size where we are handling, while we are handling that block of the I/O. Okay. The deduplication I mentioned before, so you can turn it on or off on the storage domains or on the share level as well, right? And it's going to be, first of all, a global deduplication. That means it's going to happen across all the nodes or the nodes within the cluster, regardless of how many nodes you have, or regardless who are the sources of these blocks. Okay. Same thing for the compression, configurable and can be managed from the storage domain level or from the share or the directory level. Okay. This is the erasure coding. As I said, we have multiple or different levels, depends on the number of the nodes you have. And this is something can be changed on the fly later on. So for example, if you are having or forming the cluster with 3 nodes only. So here you have the option for the erasure coding 2.1 or the RF2 and it's only RF2 here, right? So after 1 year, you added another 1 node or 2 nodes. So you need to have higher level of the erasure coding, for example. So you can change that one after the fact, after having any data or after having already some data within the cluster here. Okay. As an alternative option, you have the resilency factor or the replication factor here. So you can have RF2 or the RF3, depends on the number of the nodes you have. You can set as you can see, the quota here, whether it is physical quota or a logical quota as well. This is the encryption and can be turned on or off on the storage domains. And we have an internal KMS or key management server, but you can plug in your external key management server or key manager as well if you like. That is also possible here. And if you are using Cohesity and you are doing, let's say, archiving into the cloud, so this data is going to be replicated as an encrypted data as well. And it's good to mention here we have two types of, we can do the data at rest encryption as well as the in-flight encryption. So while we are doing replicate to other site, another Cohesity or a blob storage or another storage in the cloud, so that can be encrypted as well here. If we come back to the legacy backup setup, we mentioned that you need to have multiple components here. So the transformation is happening on the architecture or overall environment here. So instead of having this multiple components like media server, master, gateways, target storage, so you can transform all this into a scale-out architecture, software-defined, coming in a hyper-converged way, right? So that means you will have faster distribution for all the operations, whether it is the read or the ingestion, because it's a distributed file system. And because of the Snap-Tree technology, you have the ability to do that instant mass restore, so you can scale on the restore itself. So instead of just restoring one virtual machine or 4 or 8 at a time, you can select 10s or 100 at a time, and all is going to be mounted into your new environment of the VMware or Hyper-V or Nutanix. This is in case of virtual, and you can power on all of them at the same time, because it's going to be served from the Cohesity storage. The warm capability, the right ones read many, is the first security and the ransomware protection or the compliance requirements. Right. And the same thing or the same transformation is going to happen from the production into the cloud or the DR side. So then you will have that simplification of the operation, right, or the simplicity, and you have the efficiency in terms of instead of having multiple copies of the data, you have one platform addressing all these data requirements: test, environment, backup, and analytics. I'm going to pause here for a minute and see if there is any question for me. So the first question I see here, it's been answered, I believe, by Amr. Yeah, supporting Linux physical servers. That's correct. Was the hypervisor used by Cohesity? Yeah, that is also answered. So we don't need any hypervisor. Just to extend more here, the file system or the software is running on a customized CentOS on the physical server or that physical x86 server coming either our server or the HP or the Dell servers here. Okay. So there is another question here. Cohesity can have a long-term retention and can comply with DD from EMC. If so, what is the difference from ECS for long-term retention? So the difference here is, first of all, it's a software-defined solution, right? Yes, I'm managing the archive. Yes, we are addressing the same use case. Let's say the archive, when we talk about the archive. But the key difference here is that it's not only for the archive. You can have it for different use cases, the same box. So ECS or another solution is created or it's being architected to address specifically archiving, let's say, right? But here I'm talking about multiple use case can be done from the same solution. This is the key things. Other things in terms of the architecture, it's software defined. There is no proprietary hardware here. You can have it on a different hardwares. You can have it in the cloud itself, right? That's the main difference here. How is the space utilization on immutable snapshot? That's a good question. So the thing here is, even though it is immutable, but we are doing the global deduplication here. This is number one. Number two is we are doing zero cost clone. So when you try to access that data and we are doing the clone and giving you access to a clone, that clone is happening on the metadata level, right? If you are doing any change, then only we are going to write that change if it is not exist on the blocks or on the underneath storage at all. Okay, so it's we call it zero cost clone snapshots. Can it be connected to IBM Power I platform for backup? The answer is yes. So for the IBM, the mainframe series, the S series, and the other one. So we have an app on Cohesity Marketplace called Module 9, which is running on top of Cohesity, and it talk with the mainframes, and then it's generating the data or the backup from the mainframe and writing it to Cohesity. Another question here, what is the instance required on the AWS to perform POC? So for POCs, you can even have one instance. So that is M5, yeah, MD54, MD54, yeah, MD54, right? So you can have one node of it. But for the production, always the recommendation is to have the 3 nodes in the cloud. Okay, so the smallest one there in the cloud, you can have one node, and that EC2 instance, it's going to have 16 GB, I believe, and 4 or 2 TB requirements there. But it is, it's built the consumption, so you don't have to pay upfront for all. Yeah. Another question here is for the price for Cohesity for archiving versus ECS, please. So I'm not going to give any numbers because basically I don't have it. It's with the sales, but I can tell that where is the savings happening. So instead of having that ECS only acting as archive, when you have the Cohesity, it can be for archiving, it can be and making that archive as an active data. So you can plug into it any application, you can do the search. So this is the real here, or the real deal. So instead of having just archiving data, but you are going to have archive and active data out of this data. At the same time, maintaining that archiving characteristic or the requirements as an archive data. How about the OS? So there is no any license for OS here, right? So the license is for the data platform. That is the basic license. And then you have the license of the data protection in case you are using Cohesity for backup. There was a question for MSP, how it is the licensing. So we have programs for service providers, and if you leave your, I think we have the contacts. So our team can get back to you about the model of the service provider. So we have basically pay as you grow or pay as you consume or pay per use programs here for specifically for service providers. The question here, how long the support? So if I got your question, so it's the license here, it's a subscription license. Okay, so you can have the support from 1 month onward as you like. And it's including the support, the license itself. Once it's become subscription, that means everything is included within the license. The right to use and the right to get the support. Okay. How are we doing in terms of time? I don't see other question here. Okay. So in a very few minutes, I'm going to give just a quick show for the...
Sorry, Mohammed, would you like to
yes.
would you like to ask the attendees if they would like to see the GUI?
Yeah, this is what I'm going to share now.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to share this actually. Do you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm logging to our demo environment here. Now this is Helios. Helios is a SaaS model. This is where you can have multiple clusters managed all together. But there is a cloud instance, or it's a cloud based, but you can have it on-prem as well, the Helios management. So you can see here I'm managing 100 clusters altogether from the single user interface here. And you can have different dashboards, one for data protection. So you can have very high level view of all the backups which is happening across all the data centers you have. Which data center is doing the backup job at time, what errors are there, how is the replication between the data center, which data center is replicating to which data center, and all these details can be shown here. Another, for example, file services, the dashboard for the file services. You can have this for the specific cluster or for overall, and you see what type of files and folders and data that you have within this file share, if you are using Cohesity as a NAS storage. Okay. Interestingly, here we have a dashboard for the security part, so you can see if there is any abnormal activities between or on any of the virtual machines or the sites you have, right? So if I click on any virtual machines, you can see what's happening here, when it got happens, and what is the clean snapshot. So you can see here the latest clean snapshot. So if you got the attack here at this point of time, the software or the platform is going to give you when or from where you can get back to business. So if you can see here, this is anomalous snapshot. So you can see another one, clean snapshot. So you can get back to this one, for example, right? So it's giving you a very nice overview about the ransomware protection or the abnormal activities here. But also you can do the cyber scan, that is the app of the scanning for the vulnerability on all the data. Now, if I go back to the main dashboard here, and I can go and dig down on a specific cluster, for example, and I see all the operations within that cluster. So you can see on the left side here, data protection, next is file services. When I said we have one user interface to manage whatever use case we are addressing, this is what I'm talking about here. So if you are using Cohesity for data protection or backup, just expand here, you work from here if you have that license. Otherwise, the file services is already available and included within the data platform license. Okay. On the main dashboard here, you can see the storage. You can dig down on it in terms of the consumption, how much data is being transferred, how much data actually is written after deduplication, after the compression, and you can change the view as you like here. Okay. If I go to performance, I can see the overall performance of the cluster, or in terms of overview or CPU, memory, and so forth, right? Or I can go to specific nodes and see the performance metrics of that node. Okay. Or as a storage domain as well. Now, if I come to data protection, just a quick overview here. If you come to the sources, so this what we are able to certify for the backup now, starting from the virtual environment. It can be vCenter, or it can be standalone SXI server, or cloud director, VCD, or Hyper-V, Acropolis, or any cloud instance as well, right? Or RHV, Red Hat Virtualization. So you register that source. And once you register it, you will be able to see the objects within that source, and you start the protection. Okay. So if I go to this VMware and I can see all the objects managed under that vCenter, I can search by the name here, or I can see on the folder architecture, right? And I select a specific folder, and whatever virtual machine under that folder is going to be protected by this policy. And I can do the policy and select via virtual machine tags as well, right? So if you do policy like that, later on, any virtual machine newly created having this specific tag, it will be automatically added to that policy. Okay. And how to create this policy is here. You have some predefined policies, but you can create your own policy. And the first thing, you put a name for that policy, and you select the frequency of the backup. How often you are taking that backup, daily, weekly, hourly, minutes, every some minutes or some months, whatever. And for how long you are keeping it, the retention, days, weeks, months, years as well, right? And it is configurable here. Then you have the options here, multiple options. Just for example, you can have a different frequency and different retention for the logs. This is in case if you are taking backup for DB. So what we are doing here is, for example, I'm taking backup of the DB every day and I'm keeping it for whatever number of days here, let's say 7 days. But I'm taking backup of the logs every 10 minutes and I'm keeping that logs, let's say, for 3 days, just for example. If you do like this, then when you do the recovery of that SQL or the Oracle, you have the point in time recovery capability here, right? Other things you can configure for the BMR, the cloud spin, and the replication, and you can do one-to-one replication or multiple replications. So I'm taking backup here every day, keep it for 7 days, but I'm replicating to another data center every, let's say, every 2 days, okay? And I'm keeping it there for, let's say, 60 days, just for example. While the replication to the third data center on a different frequency and different retention as well. Okay, that is the cloud, or that is the replication. Now for the cloud archive, if you are going to get rid of the local tapes and you are sending this data to the cloud, whether it is just a storage there, you are not deploying any Cohesity cluster there. So that is something you can do it from here. You just register that target, external target. It can be NFS as a NAS storage. It can be tapes, or it can be another cloud service provider, right? I'm just selecting the storage. Once I select that one, I need to register it and I need to put the details. So customer is responsible of creating this account name, the access key, and share it, and then, register it within the Cohesity cluster here. Okay. The cloud spin functionality, this is where the conversion of the virtual machines from the on-prem format to the cloud format. Suppose that you have VMware on-prem, okay? And you need a DR in the cloud. So let's say in Azure. So you need to convert from VMDK to VHD format, or from that VMware format, the virtual machine, to the Azure format. This is where the Cohesity Cloud Spin come into the play. So I select where I want to send this virtual machine and convert it, let's say into this AWS subscription. And I'm doing this convert after every backup. And then I transfer the data into that cloud site, right? Okay. And this giving me the ability to run these virtual machines in the cloud if I have any disaster on the on-prem site. Okay. So this is just the basic configuration. You have another multiple options here, or different options within the policy, but this is a basic. And the good thing about the user interface is really simple one. But by just looking into the policy configuration from top here, I can tell that this policy, for example, is doing everyday backup for 1 day, keep it for 2 days. And I'm doing archiving and I'm sending to the archive site. Or this one, I'm taking everyday backup and I keep it for 1 week, and I'm taking also log backup and I replicate to another Cohesity cluster. That is the simplicity we are talking about here. Okay, we even have our mobile app, and the mobile app can be used by the admins. You just downloaded that mobile app, Cohesity mobile app, from the store, from the depends on the iOS or Android, and you can have all the monitoring and all the metrics coming into your mobile on the app, right, on the go. This is in terms of backup. Then you have the recovery, and for the registration, this we talked only about the virtualization, but you can have it for the Office 365, for the physical, for the Oracle, SQL, the Active Directory, and the NAS, whatever it is, right? The recovery can be done on the granular level if it is virtual machines or the SQLs or Oracle or AD. And so, for example, here I can recover file and folder or folder. I can search if I know the name of the file and I select it and then download it. If I don't know the name, the exact name of the file, I can just select, let's say, the server or the virtual machine. Okay. And once I select it, so if I come here and I can expand the disk and browse through that disk and see what I want to recover exactly. Right. I add it to the cart and I can add more. And then download it or return it back to the same source. Okay. Recovery also can happen, on the virtual machine level, obviously, and you can recover it to the exact same vCenter which you took the backup from, or you can recover it to another vCenter as you like. Right? So if I'm selecting that this virtual machine, I have the option here to select, do I want to recover from this snapshot or the day before, like that, which one? Okay, so whatever snapshot or the backup I have, I can recover from. Now I have only one option here, local, but if I'm doing replicate to another sites, I can select, I want to recover from the other site. So another icons is going to be here as well. And I can select, as I said, multiple virtual machines altogether. Or I make a group of the virtual machines when I take the backup. So when I do the recover, I just recover that group. So it's going to recover all the virtual machines within that group. Okay. This is the test environment where you can clone virtual machines or DBs. It can be SQL or Oracle, and mount this DB into another SQL server, for example, or another Oracle server. This is for live mount for the DB. Instead of recovering the full database, you can just recover, or let's say live mount this DB or virtual machine, and then do the operations on it, whether for testing or for the recovery of something out of, let's say, ground recover out of this. Any question?
Thank you, Mohanad. Is that the end of your presentation?
Yes, I think we can. It's time to, because I don't see other question from the attendees, so maybe we can ask.
Yes, I think we can